welcome to my bookish chat of the week. And for those who kind of chime into my lives, usually I do them with author co-hosts, but on occasion I do them with fellow book talkers who just enjoy reading. And that's what I'm going to be joined with in a little bit, in just a moment. Keep my eye out for them. But yeah, so it'll be fun. And I actually have two lives this week, and the next one will be on Thursday. But as I keep my eye out for my co-host for this week, I always like to start off by asking what the basics, which is, what are you reading? Hello, hello. What are you reading? What books have caught your attention recently? About some of our favorites. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So hopefully that wasn't that hard to figure out.
No, we did okay.
You did fantastic. Yay, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us. We're excited.
Sorry, I have my timer that's saying, by the way, you should be live on right now, and it just popped up. So we're good to go. Everybody's on schedule.
So
But yeah, so how I kind of do these, and I've done a couple with other kind of just book talkers in the past, I usually let people introduce my co-hosts, and that's you two this week, and I'll just let you talk a little bit about what you love, which is books.
Awesome. Well, I'm Belle. And I'm Crab. And we're from Crab and Bell Books. Yeah. And our passion are indie books. Yeah. So we focus a lot on supporting and raising up the indie author community. We think their voices aren't quite loud enough to compete with all the traditional publishers. So we really try and make sure that we can support them as much as we can. And hey there in the comments, hey Sky, hey Frey, good to see you guys.
Yeah. So we both really love, and we actually found indie books through TikTok, through Book Talk. And when we read our first indie book, we just, it just started like a landslide almost. And so then we found more indie authors here and found that they're really personable and really fun to interact with and chat with. And then that just sort of snowballed into just a love of supporting indie authors any which way we can. So.
Well, as an indie author myself, I can say I always appreciate people who give, our side of things a little more of a shout out, because it can be hard to get your voice above kind of the traditional publishing side of things. But yeah, so let me ask you. You were mentioning that you read an indie book and that was it. That's how you fell in love with the indie book genre. Oh, side of publishing, I guess you should say, all sorts of genres. What was your first indie book that you read then? I need to know now.
It was actually Shattered Souls by Emily Huffman. Yep. This is the first indie book and indie author that kind of pulled us into the genre.
Or the side of publishing.
Yeah, the side of publishing that we were like, oh, this is good. Yeah. This is really good. And we had the chance to have her on our Discord server and do an AMA with her. Mm-hmm. And she is just a sweetheart, and she is phenomenal. And we now have multiple copies. We have like the entire series, signed copies.
And I'm looking for then the second book that just sort of like
they're all
springboarded.
The second book, which was
Pale City.
Yeah. Where is the Pale City?
We've run out of bookshelf space, and so now we have piled books around, but then also because during our lives, people are asking us for recommendations, and then also she makes a lot of videos with books, a lot of our indie books, and so we just have piles of books around the house.
No, I love it.
And so now
I absolutely love
it. Finding books has gotten a little bit harder.
I have no idea where it is, but the second book was then The Pale City by Marshall J. Moore.
Yeah.
Who I'm sure you're familiar with. Just came out with Son of a Sailor. So that's his Rites of Resurrection trilogy. Hi, Karina. Hey, Tiffany. So just wanted to,
so that really jump-started, finding indie authors, and I don't want to say stalk, but that's kind of what it was that we kind of stalked them to find out, okay, so like what books do you guys have, like what are you putting out, and where can we find other books and other authors, and that really so those two books are what what really threw us into the world of indie writing and indie stories and indie authors and all that.
That's fantastic. And I know Son of a Sailor recently came out, and just I love seeing like a new indie author and their book catches fire. That's always fantastic because that's what we all want. Exactly. That's what we all want.
Exactly.
And with the fact that I think publication traditional maybe a little slower than indie, but the way it is, and you can write whatever you want to write. There's so many new genres coming out, or so many new ways we're categorizing older works like cozy fantasy, along with Son of the Sailor, and people are realizing, oh, I really like that, which you didn't have that before. But yeah, so that's
Absolutely.
really cool.
So speaking of cozy fantasy, I mean, I don't know if you know, but we are obsessed with Rebecca Thorne.
How could we not be?
Obsessed. We watched your interview or your chat with Rebecca Thorne, and we were, I mean, enamored, of course. And I mean, we adore her.
Yeah, huge fans.
We are huge fans of hers, and so that's probably my favorite read of 2023. I mean, it is tabbed to hell here.
Yeah.
Can't spell treason without T. So
I need to ask because the way I read, I don't tab things, but that's something that so many people do. So are they color coordinated for any reason? Because I just saw like a plethora of colors on the side, and I didn't know if they were by what are they? What is your organizational skills?
So for this particular book, so each book for me, so I'm the tabber. And so for this particular book, the light pink ones here, so these light pink guys are going to be your magic, your mentions of magic and how the magic is used in the world. These dark red guys are going to be your world building, and the history of the world. And then the orange are just going to be either quotes I like or like cute moments in their relationship. And then the green ones are going to be your crab tabs. So I made Crab read the book after I did. And so those are just tabs that Crab liked afterwards. So we just call them crab tabs.
Yeah. I'm not as much on tabbing. I used to be an annotator. I would scribble and write things in the sides and margins of my book. She hates me writing in books that we share now. And so I've cut back a lot of the annotating, but she wanted me to tab after her. So I just tabbed sections and portions of the book that I liked. So I don't have any rhyme or reason. It's just, oh, like this, tab.
I like it. And I had a question pop up, and it was referring to when I was talking to Rebecca. But one of the things when they were saying interview and the air quotes is because I don't like qualifying them as interviews. It's more of like chats. That's how I do it. It's just because even though I host it, and again, that's the way the terminology it is on the platform, it's just chat. We're chit-chatting. We're talking.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, but we really I have yet to read Wings of Fire. Someone else was mentioned that book, and I don't know if you two have read Wings of Fire yet, but someone was mentioning that book a little earlier on too.
No. And we have yet to read what Sky mentioned of Angels Before Man. Yeah. Although if Sky recommends it, most likely it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Sky has really good taste.
Sky has phenomenal taste in books.
Yeah. They're great at recommending horror, great at recommending queer books, and they've just got a lot under their belt. So
I love it. So what are some of the genres or subgenres or categories that are pulling your interest at the moment? Obviously, we're mentioning cozy fantasy being one of them, but what are some of the other ones that are, your books of choice at the moment?
So I lean very heavily into fantasy and romantasy. That's my main focus. And then from there, I go into romance and rom-com and historical romance and historical fiction. And then I'll delve a little into speculative fiction and contemporary fiction. And that's kind of where I'm happiest. And then for my palette cleansers, I'll do some thrillers, and kind of mystery. And a little bit of mystery. And if I'm feeling really like I want something different, I'll do a horror. Yeah. But that's kind of where I play.
Yeah.
I like
We
that.
do tend to read pretty much anything. It's just, kind of percentages of what we read. Definitely the majority falls towards like fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
that genre. I tend to read mostly fantasy. I grew up reading Tamora Pierce, and the
Okay.
Tortall series was like my jam. That was what I read. And so ever since then, I've been huge onto fantasy, and I will read epic fantasies, romanticities, cozy fantasy, horror fantasy, anything that's fantasy, I'll read. I'm starting to dive a little bit more into sci-fi fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
which is not something that I used to read a lot, but I feel like the way that some indie authors can do that subgenre is so fascinating and so good that, you just can't pass it up.
Yeah.
So I'm really starting to get into that. Then I love historical fiction. And I also read a lot of nonfiction. I like to read historical nonfiction and memoirs. So that's what, yeah. Oh, and I also love a good mystery thriller.
Yeah,
But
well,
then
it does.
my,
I mean, oh, sorry.
sorry,
Continue. I was just
I
saying
was
you can
just,
continue.
my guilty pleasure book though happens to be, hetero romances. So that's like my, like those
Mhm.
cheesy, like the sports romances. That's my guilty pleasure.
Hey, everybody needs a
So.
guilty pleasure. I understand. And like for me, when I as an on the author side, so I'm constantly reading it, but I'm like I'm reading 1,002 edits of my own book. But I do
Yeah.
try to challenge myself to make sure I carve a little bit of time each day to reading. I'm a slow reader, so I cannot burn through a book as quickly as other people. But one of my new things from when I say new, as the last couple of years since joining this platform, I've been trying to expand what I read because I used to only read ancient epic poetry and prose, like the source material from mythology, like really stuff that people would be like, why are you doing that for fun? And I'm like, I don't know, I love it. But since then, I'm trying to challenge myself to read more contemporary fantasies, more the iconic fantasies, and again, trying to get out of my comfort zone, which is fantasy, and read things that I would typically not pick up myself, but because other people are recommending. And I love that challenge because I, more often than not, enjoy what I read, even though it's not something that I would have grabbed without that
Right.
recommendation.
What's your last like recommended read that you would not have picked up but that you enjoyed?
Oh, okay. Let me see. Okay. I have to think. I picked up a number of the ones recently because of people on Book Talk, but that was just because I have either met them through these kind of like chit chats or heard a lot about them. One of the ones I was hesitant about, I will admit, was Song of Achilles, and the reason being is I love mythology so much that if people stray too much about, and change things, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. I'm not necessarily one that picks up romantasy be- but
Yeah.
the ones I've read, I have enjoyed. And so reading that book, I was actually really shocked how much I enjoyed it. And that's why I went right away and bought Cersei. And I think I like Cersei more. So, but I fell in love with those two. And I was like, okay. I would not have thought I would have liked it as much as I did, but I did.
That's awesome.
That's excellent. I love that.
Yeah. So
I'm
how
trying to
about
think of the
yourself?
last
Yeah.
recommended that's outside of what I typically read. So, as much as I love mystery thrillers and all of that, I tend to not read that much horror.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as far as I did, it was mostly like Stephen King short stories. Like,
I
that's what
got
I did. She like short stories. Yeah. But then Rebecca Thorne, and because we love Rebecca Thorne, she wrote This Gilded Abyss, and that's a
you.
horror fantasy. And so I was like, okay, it's fantasy with horror, so I feel like this is a good intro for me to like get into a genre that I'm not typically a fan of because it's paired with a genre that I love. And
I
she
got
knocked it out of the park with that book. That book is phenomenal. And so now I think I'm going to start reading a few more horror books and get them under my belt.
Yeah, for me, the funny thing is I watch a lot of horror, like on shows and movies. I love watching horror, but I haven't read a lot of horror books. And so a couple years ago, one of my friends was like, It. Now, if you've ever picked up It, that is a big book. It's a dedication, but I really did enjoy it. It. Capital
Yeah.
IT.
Yeah. Yeah,
But it's funny because I realize I watch a lot of sci-fi, but I haven't really read a lot of sci-fi. So I don't know what the disconnect is of enjoying that genre, but not picking up books in that genre.
So like for me, I love like the Star Trek, that sort of like sci-fi. I watched a bunch of sci-fi, especially growing up and stuff, but it's same thing. Like I didn't really like to read it, and I wonder if it's because my imagination just can't go there. I can't imagine certain
Hmm.
sci-fi elements because I have no like astrophysics training or anything like that.
I
So I
gotcha.
can't I can't picture in my head like what these things are supposed to mean. I can to a certain degree because of the shows that I've watched, but there are some things that I just can't imagine. So I think that may be part of it. With fantasy, you can just let your imagination run wild, and it doesn't have to. Your imagination can be wrong, but you're right because it's fantasy. If that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, I
So
get that. I totally understand. And I have a comment coming up from David saying Legends and Lattes made him want to write a cozy novella. See, there you go.
love that.
It
I was a
that
huge
is
fan.
on my
Of
TBR list. I promise I'm going to get to it. It is on my TBR list. It is literally in that stack of books right facing me and guilt tripping me right now.
So can you not see our comments because we can't see yours?
Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
it depends. I think the rule of thumb is if someone's following both of us at the
Okay.
beginning, we can see that person's because they're both our followers. If not, it's whoever side they jump in on. And I've never exactly figured it out, but that's the way I best assume. That's my best guess, to be
Got it.
fair.
So we have Sky over here saying that's why they love Reddit bingo, Reddit fantasy bingo because it brings you out of your comfort
Yeah.
zone. And so I have to agree with Reddit fantasy bingo, which Sky introduced us
Yeah.
to, which is literally a bingo card that has different prompts on it based on, and
Tropes and different themes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
yeah, that you have to then fill in. And so there's, like a sci-fi fantasy and
Yeah.
like a queer or MLM fantasy, etc.
So
I
it forces
like
you to search for books that are outside of your comfort zone because you
Maybe I
want to
have to
get that.
create. Maybe I have to do one of those because I created bingo cards, but they're for the author side of things, and they're like my goals each year. And I then put a sticker if I achieve any of the goals and see if I make bingo before the end of the year. Then I do a book fairy event or something. But that would be a good way to challenge people. Is like have the little bingo and be like ask the book talker community, okay, for this category, what do you recommend, and see what they say.
Yeah,
That's awesome. That's a
like
great idea.
indie book bingo.
Yeah.
I love it. Book talk bingo. Let's do this.
Yeah.
This guy
Challenge
also
accepted.
wrote, they appreciate that fantasy, the author leaves room for the imagination, and I absolutely agree.
Oh
I,
yes,
fantasy is meant for fantasies, daydreams, imagination. So
yes, definitely. And it is always interesting because you, again, writing brain, I can put words on paper where I vividly see it one way, but then someone else can read those exact same words and see it totally different way.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
neither are wrong. It's just what you perceive versus someone else perceives.
And we don't necessarily read all of the same books, but the books that we read overlap. And then sometimes I'll be like, how did you imagine this character looked? And she'll describe the character, and I'm like, yeah, that's so different from how I imagine that character to look. Or sometimes it's similar because,
Hmm.
we'll use an actor or somebody that she can just be like, oh, they look like so and so. And I'll be like, actually, yeah, that's exactly how I imagined that character to look. But it's so true that, everybody, and that's what I love about sharing the reading experience is that it's so subjective that each person has their own take on whatever, the same words that everybody's reading, but everybody has their own experience of it.
Yeah, and I think for when it comes to descriptions, again, writer brain side of things, but when writing descriptions of book characters, to what extent do you describe them? Do you describe them to every little detail, every freckle, so that next person hopefully knows exactly what you as an author perceive, or do you not describe them and just let people fill in the gaps however they see fit? And I always think it's interesting what writers will say or readers will say because everybody has such big differences on those things. Like for you, how much description do you like on a character?
I think for me personally, it depends on the story
Hmm.
because I feel like some stories I want more from the author in giving me a shape to the world, a shape to the characters. And then there are some stories that I'm like, yeah, I'm totally fine just going off with my imagination, and however I imagine them is how I imagine them. So for me, at least, it depends on each story, how much I like. I'm not that said though, I will say I'm not a huge fan of just like an author giving me the eye color, the hair color, general height, and they like to wear this style of clothes, and then that's it.
Yeah, I like to know, do we have a crooked nose? Do we have a straight nose? Like, what's the skin tone? I want to know the details. But now as we're getting more and more PR boxes, we're getting more and more character art. And so it's exciting to see, you know, this is from Mad World, and then I don't remember what
it's a Regency one, I believe.
Yeah,
yes,
it definitely looks like a Regency one.
Yeah. I can't remember the title of the book that this came with though.
Yeah, we need to look into that.
Yes, we do.
And it's just exciting to have the prints and see exactly what's in the author's mind for their characters. And then even some indie authors are including the art prints within the book now, and you have those moments, you know, where you're like, oh, well, okay, like that leaves no room for imagination. Now, do we hate that or do we love that? And part of me hates it, part of me loves it, because it leaves no room for interpretation, but it also really lets me know what the author's thinking. So, double-edged sword.
I wonder if I've not done that part where I've not embedded any character art in my books, but I wonder if that's something that's best left or for like special editions where you have the special book cover and then you have the extra art inside. It makes it a little more special, but then again, if someone wants just the basic original, then it doesn't necessarily distort whatever their imagination is going to fill in.
I absolutely love that idea. I also think that for me, I have a little bit more, I don't want to say it's necessarily self-control, but since we've been getting more character art, that I'm like, okay, I know that the character art is there, so I'm not even going to look at it, go through the book the first time, and then when I'm done with it, go back and see, hey, did my imagination match up? Or is it completely different? Because then at least I've had, if I want that experience of like not having the author's character art influence how I see it, then, you know, I can have that experience of reading the book. But I like that idea of special edition. What?
I was saying you have some self-control then. I don't know. I also paint pets, and so anytime I see art, I'm like, oh, I must look at the artwork.
Well, so I think that also partly comes from being an editor, and especially now editing more indie books where they'll include the character art with their manuscript. And I don't want to go based off of a picture that I've seen and then go through and like change necessarily the description, because sometimes the description in the words is better than what they've created in terms of art, if that makes any sense. And so I want to go into the words to be able to edit without any, you know, preconceived idea of what that character is supposed to look like. So there's a little bit of just training there on my part. So yeah, if it wasn't my job, I don't think I'd have the self-control to avoid character art, is what I'm saying.
So, Martin says making character art might disappoint fans if a movie ever gets made of it.
Well, so then that goes into like, so what about all these books where then you have fan art where it's not necessarily the author, but you have a bunch of these, you know, like I'm thinking like the big ones like, like Sarah J. Maas, her whole universe, she's had fan art of her characters for years now with many different variations, and now talks of, you know, it getting adapted and produced for television. Is there the same disappointment with that?
Oh, yeah.
What's the thought there? Because these are the ideas of what these characters are supposed to look like. So.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of those things. That's one of those reasons why it's almost, maybe not impossible, but very unlikely that even if someone translates the book to movie or book to show fantastically, a wrong casting, and one person's mind will ruin that for that one person. But someone else may be like, oh, that was a perfect actor or actress or whatever choice. And then someone else would be like, nope, absolutely wrong, because I envision something totally different. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, that happened with us with Discovery of Witches. She introduced me to that series, and then we watched the series, and there was one character, I can't remember who it was, but she was like, that was not how I envisioned them at all. And I was like, that's exactly what I thought they were like. Personality, line delivery, even not just the looks, but just everything. She was like, no, that's not how they were in my head.
Yep. But here's one thing about when it comes to character art, depending on the artistic style, some is very almost anime-like, others is very like hyper-realistic, and the more, towards the anime side, you can still fill in the gaps with your head because that's, again, still a step disconnect between reality and an interpretation of reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So I do enjoy a good adaptation. It takes a lot of effort, though. But, so
I just like stories. So you could tell me a story so many different ways. Sometimes I do disconnect it. I'm like, this is a different version of the story. But instead of like saying it's that story that I'm, because it's hard. It's hard to, do a good adaptation and do it justice. As an author, I would still be open to the idea of one of my books being adapted, but I would have to swallow the fact that it won't be the way I want it to be in the end, no matter what.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And taking that almost, the sort of like adaptation is that I've noticed a lot more of these like fairy tale retellings, and sort of like seeing how authors are adapting the fairy tales for what they're trying to do is create a brand new story almost, I mean, there's some fairy tale retellings that are I wouldn't say accurate, pretty close to the original. They're just changing a few details, a few twists and turns that are a little bit different. But then I'm editing this one right now that's an Alice in Wonderland retelling it's an amazing retelling because she's taken the characters, a number of characters from Alice in Wonderland, put them in this whole different world, but they still have a lot of the same quirks and personality traits. And the main character is still going through somewhat of the same journey as Alice did, but in a very different vibe to it. And it's very, very fun seeing how authors are able to make that work. I'm a reader, I'm an editor, I don't have the creative brain. I'm a daydreamer, but I can't translate that onto paper. And so I absolutely adore being able to work with indie authors who are taking these sorts of like adaptations or twists or creating their own stories and just getting something that's wonderfully entertaining to read onto paper. So that's one reason why I love editing, because it also gets the book into my hand earlier.
That's it. I would say you're one of the earliest ones, depending on people's routes. Then one of the first people who see those works, which is fantastic. But I totally agree. Like the adaptations of fairy tales is very popular now. I mean, I know a lot of people on Book Talk that's their jam, is to take a story that you think and retell it into a totally new way, which is. Some of them are really interesting because their twists on the original or their deviation from the original is wowing. Definitely wowing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it does need to have that wow factor, because otherwise you're just kind of reading, another Brothers Grimm version of a fairy tale, and that can get a little bit boring. But it is pretty amazing to see what some of these indie authors are doing with these retellings. And so I've been enjoying some of these retellings. And I wouldn't necessarily say before this retellings is really what I enjoyed reading, because I was like, I already know the story, and I've already seen all the Disney movies. Like, why do we?
What else do you want? You got the nice side, you got the dark side.
Exactly. Well, and that's how I felt reading Twisted Tales. I started a buddy read reading the Frozen Twisted Tale, and I read like 3 chapters, and I was like, this isn't for me. Like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
This is like reading the movie. I'm not I'm putting this down. Thank you. Like, thank you. No, thank you. Yeah. And then I was actually a beta reader on the project that she's editing. And I was like, this is amazing. This is incredible. Like, this is This is so good.
She literally at the end threw the iPad that she was reading on because the ending was just like there was a twist to it and it was just so good. She just threw it and
I was like,
yeah.
get out of here.
When she had said that she was gonna beta read, I was apprehensive because I know that she dislikes fairy tale retellings. Like that's not her jam. And then she got into it and she was just like devouring beta reading it, and I was like, "What's happening here?" You know. So it was fun to watch.
A fine sign of a good book is to convert people who didn't think they were going to like that genre, and all of a sudden you're like, I got you. It's a win. And yeah, I'm not going to mention about the Grimm's TV show and how, you know, again, the twists on what you expected is one of the reasons why people like watching that show. Yeah. But yeah, for me, like, I haven't read a lot of fairy tale retellings. I love mythology, so I love a, you know, twist to a retelling of a myth. And so that's one of the reasons why I write my Viking series. It's essentially a dark retelling of one of the stories from Norse mythology, an obscure one, or at least one that starts obscure. But I do love finding those kind of books where it's just like, again, going back to Circe and Song of Achilles, and just a way of taking a story that you may have heard.
I didn't know you wrote Vikings.
Yeah, one of my series, they're novellas. It's the Guardian Speaker. It's the one no one can ever see in these things because it's a darker cover set compared to some of the more brighter ones. But yeah, that one's my aim to adult ones because they do kind of get gritty as the series goes along. But I love all things Vikings, and I got married a couple weeks ago, and because of that, I had to gift my husband a sword because I'm Scandinavian, and everybody was like, we're doing a Viking wedding, so everything was Viking, and so he got a sword. We built wedding shields, and it was a lot of fun. But yeah, the Viking series is really cool, and it's one of the ones that I'm converting into audiobooks fairly rapidly, and the narrator is actually one of the actors from the TV show Vikings, so it's kind of like this nice little circle. I know.
Okay, so congratulations 2 times over on your Viking wedding and then also landing this amazing narrator. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, I can't claim I landed him. He actually approached me when I did open auditions because he was like, I don't know if you know who I am, but I might work with you because I've been on the show called Vikings from History Channel. I'm like, no, you're lying. You're not who you say you are. Nope, you can't be who you say you are. And he was. He actually was.
Amazing. That's really awesome. We're definitely going to get that audiobook. We love audiobooks. And
yeah, he's a fantastic voice.
Yeah. That's so
definitely
cool.
Fantastic.
She loves Viking mythology as well. And that was another one of the indie books that pulled us in. There was what is it? The Last Daughter by Alexis Menard, which is also based on some Viking myths. And so then
I have yet to read it, but I've seen her book out since her publication, and it's one of I need to put it on my physical TBR. It's still, I think, floating in my
Norse mythology.
Norse, I should say, not yeah, Norse. But that I feel like really got you into romanticies as well. Like that was your
that kickstarted my romantasy obsession.
Yeah.
Well, no, ACOTAR kickstarted my romantasy obsession.
I feel like that kickstarted plenty of people's romantasy obsession. Again, I'm so behind of reading the popular, or the iconic, or the well-versed ones, and so I have yet to dabble in ACOTAR. Right now I'm working through Wheel of Time, a totally different vibe.
It is.
So, Crab started Wheel of Time.
I started it, and the more I read it, the more I realized, okay, well, so I was reading it, I was really into it, and then I realized, wait, he died before it ended. Before the series ended. So, like, I'm never gonna get, like, a, full, his version of completion. Yeah. And so then I started to realize as the series goes on, you kind of get that feeling of, like, he's just writing to write. He's not writing to tell a story. And so I kind of DNF the series. I applaud you if you can stick through it, because I also know that Brandon Sanderson comes in and finishes the series, I believe. And so, I mean, he's amazing, a fantastic fantasy writer, and maybe I should go pick up Wheel of Time again just so I can get to Brandon Sanderson. But that is one of the few fantasy series that is currently on my DNF.
It's hard when you do find out that a series somewhere in the middle either is ghost written by for some reason, maybe, the author had too many projects, or in this case, obviously the original passed away. But, and unfortunately, I feel like that's going to be the case for Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
But I understand. I'm also one of those people who I'll read a book from one series and then I'll jump to another series and read a book, and I do this like long convoluted loop. So it takes me a while. So right now I'm between Wheel of Time, The Witcher, and a couple standalones. I'm looking over in the corner. I see The Last Kingdom in my physical TBR waiting, and I'm like, I'll get to them eventually. It just takes a while.
Those are all awesome series too. The Witcher and The Last Kingdom are amazing.
Yeah,
So.
and I see someone mentioning the Iron Druid Chronicles. I've yet to read that one, but I've heard that mentioned multiple times too.
Yeah, same. I know that we've gotten behind on a lot of our trad pub just because we've been reading so many indies lately, and so I think the last trad pub I read was actually Fourth Wing, and that was more just because I was on, I wanted something dragons, and then it was like I finished Fourth Wing, and then a whole like slew of indie dragon books came out and like dropped into my lap, and then I was like, oh yay, more indies for me to read. So.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I'm sorry. Yes, go.
Oh no, and so I read just 2 back-to-back. I read a duology of Trad Pub.
Yeah.
I read these Hollow Vows and these Twisted Bonds because they were on Hoopla, and I was like, yeah, why not? So I read those and they were phenomenal. And then Libby actually had Fourth Wing. We own it, but
the book, but she likes the audiobook.
I like to listen and read at the same time. I like to like flip back and forth. And they had the audiobook available right then. Normally it's like several months wait, but they had it right then. No wait. And I was like, all right, got it. Like, let's go. And so I'm about to start Fourth Wing. So I'm about to do 3 trad pubs in a row, which is so unlike me.
Yeah.
No, yes. I was going to say, I think traditional publishing routes, one of the benefits is that they can kind of coordinate and have audiobooks ready really early. And it's harder for indie authors because it could be financing, planning, all these, all sorts of things. So I'm trying to catch up where I am. So I have the first 4 of my Viking series in audio and the first one of my Portal Fantasy for young adults in audio. But all of them are slowly getting there eventually. We're working, we're making those moves. But yeah, I do love all things dragons. Going back to that for a second, was obsessed with dragons growing up all the way. So my first series, because it did not have a dragon in it, people were so shocked. But I was like, don't worry, we're getting there. So now I'm publishing 2 series simultaneously in the, Scandinavian version. And then my magical portal fantasy, there's actually a whole world based around dragon lore. So it's like, you're getting your dragons, I promise you. It just takes time.
Love that. Love that.
I love that so much.
We go on different kicks. Like, she was on a pirate kick for a while. I've been on a dragon kick, I feel like, for my whole life. Like, if there's a dragon book, I will read it. It doesn't matter what other types of books are out there that I'm reading at the same time. I will always pick up a dragon book and read it because I just love dragons. But we like to say her ADHD hyperfixation is she gets so focused she only reads like pirate books, or you did fae books, and then you did witches, and then so that's how she goes through her cycles of different types of books.
I love it. Yeah, for me, like anything to do with like Vikings, I always like pull, gravitate toward that one because I'm writing a series, but that's just a passion of mine, is that whole history, from the history and the mythos and everything. But yeah, when it comes to fantasy, you say that there's a monster or creature, mythological creature in it, I'm like, okay, tell me more. I want to know. I must know what you have in there.
I love fantastical creatures. I think that's maybe why I love fantasy books so much. It's for all the creatures. The dragons, the griffins, the hippogriffs.
Well, I was about to say, we need more griffins.
Yeah.
Like, why is Rebecca Thorne the only one putting griffins in stories? We need more griffins.
She wants more griffin stories.
Good to know. I'm trying to think. I'm like, I don't think I have a griffin in mind at the moment, but my Portal Fantasy is one of those that, because there's so many worlds and dimensions and realities, I've been kind of incorporating all sorts of either obscure stuff or some of the more iconic ones in like newer ways. But it's been a lot of
Yeah.
fun. But yeah, a good Griffin story. There does need to be more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I fell in love with the Griffin originally from Tamora Pierce's The Immortals Quartet about Dane. There were Griffins in that, and then I was just like, Griffins. So like I was that kid that like designed my own like shield, heraldry shield and
Yes.
everything. And like I had a Griffin on one side, a sword down the middle, and like but Griffins were on everything for me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I was gonna say I used to do like the heraldic kind of imagery for things just for fun, but going back, one of my hobbies is now making round shields. So that's one of
love
mine.
that.
All my
Love.
yeah my backboards of my office is all kind of ancient medieval weaponry.
I love that. She won't let me have any weapons because she knows that I'd like actually take them down and play with them and hurt myself. So I'm allowed to have like
Or
mini versions
or break the weapon.
or break the weapon.
Either one.
Yep. Either way, it's gonna be a hefty bill, whether it be an ER bill or like I break something of monetary value. So
No, we don't want that.
no, so I'm not allowed.
I understand, but honestly, well, I think was it which one of you? Someone mentioned I think on one of your recent lives that you used to do archery, and so I was like, well, that's a different form of
Yeah.
weaponry technically, but like it's also a sport. I used to do that sport, so
Yeah, I loved archery. I did it. I mean, I got introduced in summer camp, but that is definitely also something. Dane from Tamora Pierce was an archer, and I feel like it's not brought in as much to fantasy. I feel like most people nowadays are sticking to the swords and the magic, but I would love to see more archery in books. I really would. So
oh yeah. I definitely have a couple archers in different books. They aren't my main characters. Well, technically, one of my main characters actually does own a bow and arrow, but I also have, the swords and everything. So I kind of keep it a balance, but I haven't really focused on a main character, and that is the weapon at this moment in time. But
yeah.
which is funny because that was one of my earliest sports was archery.
Well, I think that at least as an editor, I can see why people don't choose archery is because, then it leaves a lot of distance between the character and the action. And when you're trying to write these like epic battle scenes in a fantasy book, like you want your reader to be able to hear, the clash of metal on metal. And what do you get with, an arrow piercing armor is just like that's it. You just get the whoosh and then the person standing there like, yay. Like there's no imminent peril really, and so like I get it. So, like let's have more archers, like
Yeah, because technically, thinking about it, historically, you would have probably had far more archers than you would have had swordsmen because it was easier to produce bows and arrows, and they were for hunting too, not just war.
exactly.
Fun stuff. But
Yeah.
okay, so what is one of the books that you would recommend of one of your favorite reads this year so far? We are halfway through the year, so
Halfway through the year, favorite reads, and I'm not going to repeat what we've already said before in our favorite author. We're going to come up with new ones. What would you like? I would like. Okay, I'm going to say this one. Or do you want this one?
And you can repeat. So you've also mentioned a number of great books at this moment. So feel free.
We like to not repeat just so we get the opportunity to also shout out new indies and
like
more.
Yes.
So I'm going to go with the Sneaky Lass. Check your trigger warnings, but I'm going to go with the Sneaky Lass and the entire Silver Locket series. Definitely check it out. Actually, the person who sent this to me is in the chat. So Keith, thank you so much. This is one of my favorite reads of 2023. It is phenomenal. I'm living daylights out of it. I loved it so much. Love it so much.
I think that may be my service on the side. We'll see if we can get her back in just a moment. But yeah, so for any of those people listening, what are some of your favorite reads of the year. I know I'm having a little technical difficulty. I storm just go through, so maybe on my side we shall see if they jump back in. But yeah, I'm trying to think. A big soul reader. Sorry, I lost y'all for a second. So repeat the other one.
Oh, repeat this one.
Repeat this
Sneaky
one?
Lass. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
the Sneaky
Sneaky Lass. Sorry, I lost y'all for a second. It's my service.
No, the Sneaky Lass is a great pirate fantasy. It's not a fantasy. It's a great pirate book. It's about a girl who wants to decides that
she wants a new life.
Excuse me. It's about a girl who decides that her life isn't worth living the way that it is, and so she sneaks onto a ship called Sneaky Lass and disguises herself as a man, and it has great LGBTQ rep, and I tabbed the ever-living daylights out of it, and you should pick it up for Pride Month and beyond.
Did you say check your trigger warnings?
And check your trigger warnings. And also, it's a rapid release series. It's called the Silver Locket series. So there's a bunch of books in the series currently out and available.
I think she's up to number.
They've been releasing really quick.
Yeah. So then my recommendation is this one, The Curse of the Seelie King. I was an ARC reader for this, and then I liked it so much that I was like, Belle, we're getting the physical copy because it's amazing. And it's for people who like if you're going through, like, if you have read ACOTAR and you're going through withdrawals, I highly recommend this. It's a fae romantasy, action-packed. There's a curse that they have to break, but in order to do so, it requires great sacrifice. And so, yeah, anyways, good book, arranged marriage, enemies to lovers. It's a fun time. It's a fun time.
Is that the first of a series or a standalone? Do you know?
It is the first of a series. Yes, okay. Definitely the first of a series. I should remember that because the end is a bit of a cliffhanger. Okay. And so I remember also reading this and just being like, where's the second one? Oh wait, it's an arc. I have to wait a long time for the second one to come out. So, but yeah, Curse of the Seelie King. It's a good one. A good fae romantasy.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't remember the order of books that I've been reading. I have a whole stack of books because I have been very bad and been very busy, and I have a stack of books that I've read that I need to leave the reviews for. So in that stack, and I do apologize for anybody's books who are still sitting in that stack, I think one of my favorite relatively recent reads, was ACOTAR's Greatest Trick from David Burrow here. So yeah. So that one, if you haven't read it, that's a pretty good. It's a thicker read. I got it. I realized. There you are. There you go. See, it was right next to me. But yeah, it's a little thicker read, but like it is. I thought it was like one of my favorite books that I have read in a long, long time. It is multiple point of view. Does have some great twists. It's about a kingdom where magic is illegal. And there are magic hunters out there, and the main character is a magician in public and daring to do tricks in front of people. So it's a pretty cool book if you have not read that one. But that's also an indie rep right there.
All right, I'm picking up that one.
I'm sorry, what's it called?
The pronunciation is ACOTAR's Greatest Trick. I don't have this on Inverse because I didn't think about that, but it's Jason Burrow who's on this platform as well, and it's his first book of that series.
ACOTAR's Greatest Trick.
I love that.
Yes.
Love that.
We're definitely
there. I did a rep. See, I read sometimes.
Oh, Keith is saying.
Yeah.
Keith is saying who? Keith actually, him and Keith's book. Keith is saying he read it and loved it. So Keith is actually the author of Your Device, Welcome to Arth, which is one of the coolest ideas
it's a
that I've
sci-fi
heard
fantasy where you put on the device and you get not transported physically, but mentally, physically into the host of another creature on another planet, and it's almost like you're just there watching them live their lives, but that world over there has a lot of like D&D vibes, and so anyhow, yeah. So it's not necessarily a portal fantasy, but it's like a device fantasy where you get to inhabit the consciousness of somebody else.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's out.
So that's chatter. I have some chatter on my side. let me see, Honor Harrington series by David Weber. 14-book space opera was recommended. I actually have not read space opera, and I should pick up a book. And I'm glad that, I have someone who's read some of my Viking books. Hopefully you enjoyed them. But yeah, Magic Hunters for Akathor's Great Trick. It's just the people who use magic, it's illegal, and they have to kind of hide the fact that they can wield magic from the general population, or else they get hunted down by a group of I wouldn't say fanatics. They have their belief system of why magic is bad. But no, it's a fun book. But yeah,
Definitely.
so that's cool. I love book recs. I love trying to. And the fun thing about this is I will repurpose this on my YouTube channel, our chat, in a few weeks. So if anybody does need to reference what we've talked about, it'll be there.
That's awesome.
Voila!
That's awesome.
Voila! But
Yeah.
yeah, I love it.
But for me, just lately, I've been working a lot, so I haven't actually been able to read for pleasure. And so I am glad when I have a chance every now and again to sneak, a book that's not work in there. That said, I'm working on some really amazing books that are coming out, and I am so excited. If you love horror fantasy, there's another book that's coming out called The House of Whispers by Sin Haybear, and that's coming out in October because it's spooky. It's a what is it? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Jack the Ripper retelling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with magic and fae, and some creatures in it. So that one's a really fun one. I have the Alice in Wonderland that I'm doing, and then I also have a contemporary fiction coming up that I'm also doing a sensitivity read for. I don't know much about that one. I need to get the blurb from the author.
Yeah.
But that one's fun.
You're doing an LGBTQ sensitivity read as well as a line and a copy edit on that one.
So a lot of good books coming up.
So I have a good question for you. Someone kind of was, I think, feeling out, asked a weird way, but was feeling out when you guys serve as either beta readers or ARC readers, or even as the editing side, how long in advance do you want the book? Like, how long do you have it in your hands before you need to, turn it over and go to the next stage? What do y'all prefer?
So if I'm ARC reading, I like 3 weeks. I know 2 weeks used to be the norm, but I prefer 3 weeks now. And I think everyone's kind of getting to 3 weeks now as that somewhat being the norm, and I think that's great.
Yeah. For me,
especially as a beta reader.
Yeah.
As a beta, 4 weeks would be great, but 3 weeks is sufficient because providing that feedback, especially if they're not working with a developmental editor, 4 weeks. Yeah. If they are working with a developmental editor, 3 weeks is fine.
Gotcha.
For me, with editing, I work very quickly than a beta reader or an ARC reader. For me, it's dependent on word count. And so the word count will determine how long it takes me for doing the type of editing. And I do mainly two different types of editing, line editing and copy editing. And they're two very different types of editing. So the line editing is going to take me a little bit longer because I'm actually looking at the flow, the stylistic usage, and the sentence transition. So, it's clear, cohesive, and it's understandable. Whereas with the copy editing, I'm looking at all your punctuation, your capitalization, making sure the grammar side of things is squared away. And that doesn't take as much time because the line editing, I'm actually having to go, is 57 uses of this color, is that necessary, or should we maybe change that up?
Yep.
So that said, I also will then ask how many words it is, and then for the author, I ask, when is your publishing date? And I like to work backward from the publishing date. If I say, okay, the publishing date is here, that means that you need this much time for your ARC readers, and that means you also need this much time for the copy edit to be done, and then from there, this much time for your edits after a line edit, after you get it from your dev editor. And so then
a buffer.
Yeah. Always, I personally like to tell authors, give yourself at least like 7 days worth of buffer time in this whole process, at least. Because you're going to have somebody who is maybe for one reason or another a little bit delayed. And so you don't want everything just squished up right next to each other and then find yourself at, the time when it's supposed to be finalized and you're sending off to ARC readers so you can get to your publishing date, and on your line editor, which is, 3 weeks worth of, depending on how long it is, it could be 3 weeks worth of work in between your line edit there. And now you're delayed 3 weeks kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And that's why it's always interesting, because for me, yes, I like giving as much time as possible.
Yeah.
But things happen, and there's always going to be a case where you're going to be scrambling your time, and you don't want that. So always give more time.
Time. Yeah. But I also
have a question. Sorry, yeah.
Because I'm working not for the readers, I'm working for the author. As an editor, my turnarounds are quicker. I will do 60,000 words in 4 days. Or, depending on the type of edit, 60,000 for a line edit in 4 days, for a copy edit in 3 days. Because I know I don't want to be the one that they're waiting on. So I will devote, all the time during that day to get your book out. Obviously, the more words there are, it's going to add a day, and it'll go up, if it's 200,000 words, you're looking at a bit more time, but yeah.
Yeah, and I ask for 3 weeks for a beta read, but I usually do it in 5 days.
5 days. Yeah, no, 5 weeks. Not 5 days.
Wait, hold on.
5 days. 5 days.
But I usually do it in 5 days.
No, that's cool. I understand. Yeah, that's why, like, for me, when my ideal is actually when I'm working with, like, ARC readers, depending on the size of the book, my full length, I would idealistically give them a month, because I write slightly longer books, but I also know things are going to come up. Right. And when it comes to my novellas, they're shorter, so 2 weeks might still be fine for them because they're a novella, not a true, full length book. But, again, more the better.
Yeah. We just had a question on ours. Martin asked, do some styles of writing slow me down as an editor? And to be honest, it's not necessarily the style of writing. It's whether or not you've worked with a developmental editor. So the line editor comes in after the whole story has been set down. You've hashed it out. You know all the actions and sort of, the ups and downs of your story. Then the line editor comes in and just looks at the flow of the story, not saying like this piece needs to go here and this piece. It's, are you conveying your story in a coherent, fluid way? That's what a line editor is looking at. What trips me up is if you haven't worked with a developmental editor, then things are disjointed or out of place. And then I will have to come in and be like, you might want to put this here. And so then that adds to it a little bit, but that's the only thing that really slows me down. Style of writing doesn't, I've edited so many different writers that I'm adaptable to style of writing. So.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a good thing to always note, that there are so many different type of editors. Some will do multiple things. Some only do what they say they're going to do. So be aware when you're looking for an editor. And I had a question come up a little bit ago asking, what is on Belle's shirt?
Oh, it's all of Henry VIII's wives from when we saw 6 on Broadway.
There you go. Fantastic. I can't actually read backwards.
So Keith says, hey guys, Martin has an awesome book worth checking out. So I just want to know which one Keith is talking about. Or are you talking about A Trick of Light, the one that we were ARC readers on and we just don't have a copy? What? Which one?
Okay.
Giving you a hard time.
I love it. I absolutely love it. No, that's cool. And then, I think that's always important when people are trying to start the writing process, to understand the time it takes after you think you're done. You're not done.
Yeah. And I think that's what, so I personally, since joining, TikTok and really realizing how little resources a lot of indie authors have for even understanding the process of bringing editing into getting a manuscript ready for publishing. That's one of the things that I love, talking to authors about is you should get a dev editor. This is what they do. And then at this point, bring in a line editor, and then at this point bring in a copy editor, and then you can bring in, your beta readers, your ARC readers, that sort of thing. And I've realized, I love that a lot of people just want to jump right in and write their stories, but to make a story one that people will pick up and gobble up, you need a couple more eyes than just yours on it. And that's my personal opinion, just to make it one that, everybody can understand and read. So I love helping indie authors out with that way. I love editing indie books. I get an array of stories before other people get them, which is, my little perk. But then also that's the way that I sort of also give back to the indie authors. You're giving me incredible stories to read. I can give you professional services at a discount because I want you guys to be able to have access to that. So,
yeah. If you check out our prices, you'll see that they are extremely reasonable.
Just because I get it. Like an indie author, you're not working, with all the resources of traditional publishing. Traditional publishing, it's the publisher that upfronts the costs for editors, it's their editors on their payroll that they're paying. But for indie authors, they're the ones that are having to shell out the cost for it. And so I'm like, no, you don't have to pay publishing house prices for an editor when you're not a publishing house, So.
No, I love that. I love that. And I feel like, everybody who's probably worked with you is so very grateful of for that fact that you're so willing, both of you, to give back to the indie community, because it is hard. It's hard. I know my publishing career, my first one was published in 2016, and it took me years to figure out what to do and everything. Prior to that, it was almost a decade between, the idea coming in my head and actually figuring out how to do the publishing game. And even then, it was a long game to try to figure out the marketing and figuring out how to find people. But yeah, so when people are, so willing to be sharing the open and giving back, it's fantastic. So I do applaud both of you.
Thank you. Well, and I don't know if you see on your side, I see a lot of hearts popping up. So I think people are agreeing that, it's a nice thing. This community is fantastic. I mean, it's what we can do is we can give our my editing services, and then just buying all of the indie books. That's what we can do. So.
All the indie books, everyone. There are so many out there. That would be a feast. I do see a question popping up asking if I have ever written characters that I just can't stand. I have definitely written characters that, yes, I do not like, but they fit the storyline. And I think that's a great challenge for authors, because if you liked everyone you wrote, that's not always the way. And it also doesn't make necessarily a dynamic story. You have to have characters that you disagree with, you don't like, that's, look at the world in a way that you yourself truly do not look in the world that way, to make just your reality that much more rich. So, yes, I have written some. Thankfully, more often than not, I like the ones you're supposed to like.
That's good.
That's good, yes.
I mean, I do love it when an author loves the villain that they've written, though. Because at least to me, then you can tell that the villain is not just a two-dimensional villain thrown in there as like a foil for the protagonist or something like that. There's depth there. So I do love that when the authors bring villains to life.
And I definitely have a couple villains I have one that's, I guess, a true villain that has been growing on me through the one series. It's my Portal Fantasy. It's one of them. And I didn't expect me to like that particular villain as much. And then I definitely have a character in my Viking series that is supposed to be like I would say an antagonist. I would never call him a true villain, but definitely one of the big antagonists for a long haul of it. And I just really liked his character. Unlike, I needed that character to kind of counter some of the other ones, just the way, the perception of reality in the world, but really liked this character, even though he was the original antagonist in the story.
Love that. You got to have that, because otherwise the world becomes two-dimensional, or flat and shallow. You've got to have those different types of personalities in there. So
Martin, an author on our side, says, I think bad characters are more fun to write.
They can be, for sure. They definitely can be. So, okay, one more question on my side, and then I have a question for you guys. my question popped up saying, do you know how a story ends before I start it? I always do. At this point in time, I always know how the book and the series is going to end. The first book and then the greater series is going to end before I start the project. And I think that helps me, because I know where the end game is, it does help me kind of get there in the way I want it to get there. That's not always the case. There are definitely authors who write, as they say, write by the seat of their pants and kind of just go with it and never know how the book's going to end until it ends. And they're like, wow, that was so surprising, and that's fantastic too. I'm not right that way. I'm definitely more on the planning side of things, but yeah.
So, I love that. As a reader, I love that because I feel like that gives the overall feeling of the story more structure, and I like that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, so I said, and sometimes you can't, as a reader, you may not be able to tell who did what approach, which is the wonderful thing of the editing process. You may have a book that's very loosely hashed out, but by the end of it, it's fantastic. Or you have one that you wrote the first draft and it's pretty much said and done. You're just ready to polish up a few things, and they're both fine processes. So let me ask you, since we've rounded the hour, and I don't know how long y'all have, but was there anything you two wanted to talk about that you haven't covered? Anything you want to do a shout out of other social media, or do you have any other kind of platforms or websites that people can follow you on, if they're not already following you on this? And then if they're not following you on this, why aren't they following you?
Why aren't you following us on here? If you're not following us on here, please go ahead and give us a follow. We would appreciate it greatly. We're getting so close to 10K. We could definitely use the boost.
Yeah.
And if you need an editor, please consider Crab at crabediting.com. That's crab, as in the seafood, crabediting.com. And check her out. Like I said, prices are super reasonable. I saw Martin put how much he paid in there, and I mean, that knocks me off my chair because
he said he paid about £900 for just copy editing.
And that makes me clutch my pearls.
Yeah.
No.
No, we're not going to do that to indies.
Absolutely not. We would never.
Yeah.
So.
And I think he said in there is to him, that's not a lucrative career. That's more of an expensive hobby. I don't treat it as a hobby, but I also, career, sure, but it's more like this is what I do to support indie authors. So this is, and the prices are what they are because I want to support indie authors, give them professional quality services.
And you'll see on the website, Crab has her bachelor's in English and linguistics and her master's in library information sciences. So she is master's trained.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say.
I know as an author, you develop a relationship with a long-term editor. And that's fantastic. I have one I've been working with since the beginning, but I know she's moving toward the retirement stage. So, I'm going to be thrown back into that little whole pool of trying to find, a new editor before too long too. So I understand when you don't have one, it's hard. It's hard to figure out how to find one, and are they qualified, or do they know what they're doing? Or are they just going to take your money and run with it kind of thing?
So what I always say for authors that are wondering that, and that's a very, very smart attitude to have, because one of the reasons why I started, sort of marketing myself more towards indie authors also is I realized how many people were out there to scam indie authors and just say, yeah, I'll edit, and then come in, take their money, and then not edit the book at all, or do a really crappy job editing. So for any author who reaches out and wants a free sample done, I am more than willing to do that. I will edit a chapter of your book for free, completely for free, just so you can see what my style of editing is and see if that works with you. And you can also see the quality and everything like that. So just putting that out there. Anybody that needs an editor, I'm here for you. And if you want an editor, or if you don't need an editor, but you want some recommendations, I get it. Not everybody can work with me. That's fine. But if you want recommendations for other people, I can definitely pass that along too. So, yeah.
Again, follow them. You better be following.
Yeah, just follow us because we are huge indie author supporters. We do a call out the middle of every month for the following month so that we can get a list basically of all the books that are getting released. So like we are gathering up our July releases, and every week in July at the beginning of the week we put a shout out for all of the books that are getting released in that week, so people can, sort of like their little bulletin announcement of like, hey, these are the books being released, go check them out. So
I love that. I absolutely
yeah.
love that. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, I have a book. My next one is I just got back from the editor recently, and I'm going through the polishing thing. But then the formatting is what catches me up, because it's like the actual formatting and making it all fit in the page the way I want it to fit. That
Yeah.
always takes longer than I think it's going to take in my head. And that one I had to learn how to buffer, because I want to say I'm going to release it at the end of July, and I'm like, most likely it's not.
Most likely it'll be August, and that's okay.
Most likely pushed off. But yeah, I understand that. But no, that's fantastic. And any authors who have upcoming releases, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Great thing.
Yeah. I mean, we love doing shout outs for people, and we do indie author spotlights once a week where we choose a different author to sort of just highlight.
And all of this is free,
Yeah.
just so you guys know.
We
don't
not
charge
anything. The only thing we
for the
charge
love of books.
for is my editing. Yep.
I love it. Well, thank you too for coming out and spending some time with us today. And yeah, if you ever want to do this again, I like scheduling these weekly, and I do them a little bit, schedule in advance, of course, but like I do them weekly, and I just love talking about books.
What do we both really enjoyed this today, and we're honored, honestly, and we're thrilled that we get asked to do this. So
yeah, thank you so much for having us.
It's been fun. I've been loving watching, your posts, and then finally able to join a couple of your lives to kind of creep on them. And
no, I love that. I love that. We're all just kind of stalking each other on TikTok, right? I mean, a little bit.
Definitely. But yeah, again, if you ever want to do this again, let me know. I'm here. And if not, we'll be definitely talking about books going forward.
Yes, we will.
Thank you
and
so
have
much.
a fantastic afternoon or evening or morning or wherever you are in the world for all those watchers. And I'll catch y'all later. Bye.